Hello, it's Ted Ritzer, host of the Greening Government webinar speaker series. The series is a collaboration between my department, Alberta Environment and Parks, the Alberta Climate Change Office, and the Municipal Climate Change Action Centre. The goals of the series are to help governments in Alberta reduce their carbon footprint and to help them grow their green economy. And today we're really fortunate to be joined by Fiona Kavanagh, Director of Consultation, on a topic of using citizen panels to look at energy and climate challenges and how to engage citizens. And Fiona worked and collaborated with the City of Edmonton. So Fiona, it's so wonderful that you've agreed to present, and we can't wait to hear your experience with the City of Edmonton. Thanks so much for doing this.
You're welcome. Thank you, Ted. And shout out to everyone who is participating today in the webinar. I'm coming at you live from downtown Edmonton in the Federal Building, where I am the Director of Consultation for Government Alberta. And I'm just really super excited, and I really want to thank Ted for inviting me. I'm just super excited to have a conversation with you today and lead a discussion about a really innovative and exciting project I was involved in when I was the executive director of the Centre for Public Involvement, which is a partnership between the City of Edmonton and the University of Alberta that was really set up to kind of advance research and practice and excellence in public engagement. And one of the projects that I had the opportunity to co-lead was this citizen panel on Edmonton's energy and climate challenges, which was, again, a very ambitious and innovative citizen engagement that really supported the city's policymaking around energy transition. So I just want to start by really just kind of sharing an overarching question, which I hope as I go through kind of the story and the design and the case study of this particular project, that we have this kind of in the forefront of our minds around and can really help frame some of the discussion at the end around what are the limits, possibilities, and risks of engaging citizens and having citizens and stakeholders work together in really ambitious policy development. So I just want to leave us kind of with that at top of mind as I go through this. So before I really dive into, and I'm going to go through how we designed the citizen panel, what is a citizen panel, what were some of the outputs and impacts, and I will hopefully have time as well to share a video with you that captures some of the impacts to policy that the citizen panel accomplished. So just to give you a bit of a background about the citizen panel on Edmonton's energy and climate challenges, this was really in support of the city's ambitious work on addressing climate change on a municipal level. So I'm sure some of you on the line are familiar with the city's strategic plan, The Way We Green. So this panel was really in support of that work that the city was doing. Particularly, there was a specific chapter within The Way We Green around addressing climate and energy transition. So the whole work of the citizen panel was really to focus on and support the city in their policy work around developing an energy transition policy for Edmonton. And so my next slide gives you kind of a sense of where the citizen panel fit into that overall work the city was doing. So as I mentioned, in phase one, the city had developed their sort of overarching strategy, The Way We Green, to really look at how they were going to address environmental challenges, including energy transition and climate. And then the next step that the city did was to really look to work in collaboration with the Pembina Institute to develop Edmonton's energy transition discussion paper that really dove deeply and incorporated some of the technical scenarios and work that was needed to think through this, that the Pembina delivered for the City of Edmonton. And this energy transition paper was a really critical foundation and part of some of the framing of the citizen panel that I'm going to now talk quite deeply about. So, and then as I will talk about a little bit later, then the citizen panel led to the city's energy transition policy and then implementation strategy. So just giving you a sense of the strategy development process. And I will throughout just allow for time for questions, so I'm not going through things and not bringing you along. So just wanted to now give you a snapshot of what is a citizens panel before I talk specifically about the citizen panel on energy and climate challenge. So the citizen panel in sort of generally brings what we would call a mini public. So a diversity of citizens that kind of represent the place. So brings Edmonton, in this case, Edmonton into a room. And in the case of Edmonton Citizen Panel on Energy and Climate, both demographically and attitudinally. And I'll get into that in a lot more detail in a little bit. The second really core aspect of a citizen panel is it allows time to provide citizens with some deep learning opportunities, balanced materials that they also hear from a range and different experts to really have deep understanding in which they can then move forward on making some informed input or informed recommendations. Another critical piece of this is which is quite different potentially than some other forms of public engagement, in that we get people to really reflect deeply on values and priorities and have conversations with one another about how their values might be different from their neighbors or from some of the other panel members, and really deliberating on costs and trade-offs that are involved in any of the recommendations that they may bring forward. And citizen panels, I think it's important to kind of articulate right at the beginning, are a form of deliberative democracy or deliberative public engagement. So a panel is designed to bring together, a group of very diverse citizens to deliberate. So not to debate or not to give their top of mind opinion, but really to work together to deliberate on a problem. In the case of this, the problem was, how does the city move forward and think about energy and climate challenges, and to deliberate on that, and the definition that I've provided here about deliberation is from John Gastel, who has actually visited Edmonton and given some talks here, but who talks about deliberation as when people carefully examine a problem, arrive at well-reasoned solutions after a period of inclusive, respectful consideration of diverse viewpoints, which is different or deviates, I think, from a lot of kind of traditional public engagement that we see in our day-to-day work. So one thing I also want to stress is that deliberative public involvement, such as the panel, is necessary for effective and meaningful citizen involvement in really complex environmental planning. And I think results in much better decision-making and community support for some of the implementation measures. And we very much saw this in the case of the energy and climate citizen panel. But I think it's really important to clarify at the outset that citizen panels are not intended to be used in every context or for every decision requiring public involvement. They are most effective for politically contentious or complex public policy issues, or issues that have very high impact to community. And so before I dive into the actually design of this panel, I want to raise a couple of points or clarifications as well about involving citizens in complex environmental planning, such as looking at energy and climate. So the first, I think, and this I think we came up a lot during this process, was that, citizens are not intended to replace technical experts. Technical experts, when we're looking at energy transition and climate change, are very, very much needed. But citizens' perspectives are critical to understanding values, to understand citizen priorities, to understand where citizens are willing to support implementation strategies. And also just because decisions about environmental planning, as we know, are not just technical decisions, but are values-based, political, economic, and social. So where citizens can give us very critical input and perspectives. The second is, and I think this idea is challenged often, that, that citizens are very much capable of providing important and valuable input and developing really robust recommendations, which I think are critical for effectively addressing and finding solutions to complex environmental issues. And then just the third sort of more general comment I want to make, that for a citizen panel to be successful, there must be really critical support from senior leadership and decision makers, and that it must be designed to eventually have some impact on decision making, giving all the time and resources that are invested both by the sponsors of projects like this and of participants and citizens themselves. So now that I've given you sort of a general overview, I'm going to talk specifically about how we designed the Edmonton Citizen Panel, talking about first who participated. So Edmonton Citizen Panel had 56 citizens who came together over 6 Saturdays in 2012. So they put in about 42 hours of time in support of developing really in-depth recommendations. So a sustained and significant public engagement effort. So one of the first elements about design that I want to talk about is really how we addressed inclusion, diversity, and accessibility. So I think a really common and legitimate critique of many public involvement efforts is that they involve the same people participate, the sort of usual suspects, and that they do not involve a broad spectrum of the views and demographics of a community, an ongoing challenge, I think, in public involvement. So citizen panels are designed to try and, as I mentioned at the beginning, bring mini publics or a community together in a room using very, very specific and very rigorous recruitment methods. So in the case of Edmonton Citizen Panel, a rigorous recruitment process was designed where initially a large sample of over 2,400 citizens were contacted over 2 months. And out of that random recruitment process, a final group of 46 Edmontonians who came from all 12 wards in the city. And the recruitment process, again, as I mentioned, was designed to have Edmonton in a room, meaning a group of participants that sounded and looked like Edmonton, both demographically and attitudinally. So obviously, given we are like fully aware, however, of the limitations of a group of 56. So just to give you a little bit more insight on some of the demographic criteria, so using census data and that were used in recruitment. So we looked at wards, so it was really critical for city administration and for city councilors to ensure that all different neighborhoods and areas of the city geographically were represented. We ensured that there was a broad diversity of age that reflective of census data for Edmonton, of education and income levels, of ethnicity, of abilities, and a really interesting criteria that we added as part of our recruitment was we also wanted to ensure, given the topic of energy and climate, that we also had people who were employed either directly or indirectly in the energy industry. So those were some of the broad demographic criteria that we were using to ensure, again, that we had Edmonton in the room. And one of the interesting things about this citizen panel as well, that was an innovation and an evolution from prior work that the city had done and that I've been involved in prior citizen panels, was that realizing that just when you have a demographically diverse group in the room, you don't necessarily always have an attitudinally diverse group within a room. So one of the things we thought, and I think was really stressed by city staff who were involved in helping design this, was the importance of also having attitudinal diversity. So how we did that was at the beginning of the recruitment process, we actually worked with a research firm to design a general population survey that could determine and look at attitudes of Edmonton around energy and climate, around sense of belief in the value or impact of public engagement. And so it was really, really interesting in that we also had a number of participants in the room who really had strong opinions around whether or not they thought climate change was real. So again, having that attitudinal diversity was an additional element we added to recruitment, so that the group of 56 citizens, and you can see some of them in this picture, really, really reflected and had a very representative sample of folks in the room. So I just want to pause before I keep going forward on talking more about how we design the panel, just to touch base to see if there's any questions or any clarifications needed before I keep going.
So just for folks, there is a online Q&A function where you can post questions at this time. Okay, so we've got our first question here. At what point was the attitudinal survey distributed?
So that was part of so how recruitment works is basically we work with a research firm and we actually do like random phone calling. And we did, so prior to actually starting that process, we did a Gen Pop survey. So we could look and say, okay, in Edmonton, there's approximately 8% of folks in Edmonton that believe that climate change is not real. So we tried to ensure, and I mean, there's trade-offs between, you know, the demographic and the attitudinal. So the attitudinal survey was done at the beginning. We also wanted to make sure we were asking questions around efficacy. So how much people thought public engagement was impactful or not. So we also wanted to make sure that we had people in the room that had diverse views on energy and climate. We also asked questions around who do you think is responsible for addressing climate change, municipal government, federal government, provincial government, industry. So we had a quite interesting composition of views on both energy and climate and on public engagement. And in the final report, and that is available online, it gives you a sense of some of those questions that we asked. So the attitudinal done at the beginning. One of the other things I'll mention too, just about that, which I'll get to a little bit more at the end, is that part of this project was, there was very much a robust research element to it. So once we had the 56 panelists selected, prior to the very first session, we also did another survey that looked at, again, sort of their starting point, both in terms of knowledge of topic, attitudes, and opinions. So we could also measure over the course of the 6 sessions and then months after, where people started in terms of their knowledge, views, opinions, values, and where they ended at the end of the panel. And you can see one of the pictures here at the top shows like even how we kind of looked at that in the room often, and we did a lot of kind of check-ins at points to see, and we did see, which I will just kind of talk to more at the end, we did see shifts in opinions and attitudes over the process. All right, so I think I'll keep going on. So as I mentioned, the first part of our work to get this citizen panel moving forward was recruitment. So now we have these 56 folks in a room that look and sound like Edmonton. There's been some trade-offs. Now we really, I just want to take us back to the definition of deliberation that John Gastel provides us, who's the deliberation scholar from the US. So the first part of designing a panel is really how we supported participants to examine the problem of energy transition and climate in Edmonton. And so we really, and I think an important point to make here is that citizens came into the panel process with very, very different levels and types of knowledge, technical information. So we really wanted to ensure that for citizens to be able to equally and effectively participate, we really had to provide the time and support to allow substantial learning to take place, and to really provide the time and opportunity for people to examine the issue from many, many different angles and lenses. So we prepared a participant handbook at the beginning that tried to, and this was tricky, tried to take some of the very robust technical information that the Pembina Institute had provided in the energy transition discussion paper and kind of develop that into materials for citizens that were both very balanced, but also accessible in terms of that they were plain language and that they weren't too technical. So that was some of the upfront work. And then we did a number of experiential activities, small group conversations. We had a number of academics and scholars come and give multimedia presentations. We had academic armchair panel conversations. We had industry come and also participate in the armchair conversations. And we created, as I mentioned, 2 key learning resources, one of which was a participant handbook that really helped to make the energy transition paper really digestible. So we did a lot of work, and we probably spent 2 full Saturdays carefully examining the problem. And then we shifted after that to start to help and support the panelists to start looking at some recommendations and some solutions. One other thing just to mention is that we had also an extensive investment of time by city staff, from who from transportation, from environment, from all sort of different backgrounds that were involved in energy transition planning. So the city staff put in extensive time to support citizens to really understand this work. And also, as I mentioned, we had the business community such as EPCOR, the Urban Development Institute, all came in because, again, what's really critical in a panel is that you give a range of perspectives on a topic and you give very balanced, robust information so that people can make very good, informed decisions. So the next thing I want to just touch on in this definition of deliberation, again, which is just so critical that panels are designed for deliberation, is the respectful consideration of diverse viewpoints. So again, there was many small group activities where participants shared different viewpoints, stories, challenged information from research, challenged each other, and really had really in-depth dialogues about how energy and climate affected them differently, each of them differently. And we also spent quite a bit of time, as I mentioned at the beginning, really exploring values. What do we value individually, but also what do we value more on a collective sense for our city? What do we see the future? What are some of those important priorities as we move forward as a city? And then finally, we work towards helping the participants arrive at well-reasoned solutions as a sort of final element of deliberation. And so after participants looked at this problem of energy and climate and asked many questions, and we had a question sheet going every session, and we also did a lot of follow-up between sessions to make sure that if there was outstanding questions that people had at the end of each session, they were followed up on between sessions. So participants took a lot of time to really discuss trade-offs, priorities, challenges, and really towards the end of the six full day sessions, really start to see and move towards some areas of common ground where there was still divergence, and start to establish overall ideas and recommendations for specific topic areas. And one other, I think, critical aspect of design was around how we use technology to support and engage individual panel views at different points during the process. And also to determine, as we were moving along, very carefully to see where there was levels of support for certain emerging recommendations. So we did use clickers. And so as we move towards developing recommendations, we tested those on a very individual basis. So we did kind of voting on all of the major recommendations, so if people were uncomfortable talking about really how they felt in the more group situation, that we were ensuring that we were also testing that on an individual level. And if you see the final report, it shows you and reports on all of the voting and all of the where there was it shows you, I guess, the overall level of support for the sub recommendations in the report. So, which also provided city administration with some really good input on where there were certain recommendations that they would have to probably work harder on if they were going to move forward with on building public kind of buy-in or public support for. So after 6 full Saturdays of deliberating with all of the elements in design that I've just mentioned, I now want to just shift towards talking to you about what were some of the outputs and the impacts of the citizen panel. But before I go on, I just want to touch point in again to see if there's any more questions or if there's any clarifications needed around the design of the 6 sessions that got us to the recommendations.
Okay. Again, if you have any questions, post them to the online Q&A window. So far, no questions.
Okay, so one of the other things I want to mention before I shift to looking at outputs and impacts is that we did do a summary kind of newsletter that after each session, so after each Saturday, we really compiled all of the input that was heard, some of the top line themes that emerged, and presented those back out each week. so that panelists had a sense of where the process was going and that we were adequately and accurately capturing their input throughout. One of the other design characteristics that I want to also just mention, which kind of ties back into something I said at the beginning around how critical it is to have decision makers supportive of and involved in the panel process. So Dawn Iveson, who was a counselor at the time in the City of Edmonton, came to multiple sessions and also kicked off the citizen panel, and other counselors came as well. So, and continually articulated to citizens that decision makers were listening and that they were extremely thankful and grateful and valued the input that citizens and the time and resources that citizens were contributing to this process. So I think that was another really critical design feature, including that we did have a letter from again, Dawn Iveson, sort of at the midway process to ensure that, you know, after 3 full Saturdays, people are getting tired talking about energy and climate, that they were reminded again how important the process was and how much their recommendations would be taken seriously and would inform some of the policy work happening. So now shifting to outputs. So obviously a clear and critical output of the panel was that there was a final report that citizens themselves, with support from myself, from other project leads, developed a final report on all of their recommendations, including principles that they thought were really critical for the city to consider as it moved forward on decision making. So a very robust report that's available online. That's a citizens panel report on energy and climate challenges. So a very thoughtful consideration of all of the perspectives and considerations that really were important, that they really wrestled with. So it really provided, again, not top of mind opinions, not sort of people's initial impressions about energy and climate, but really reflected how the sort of citizens grappled with costs, benefits, trade-offs. And also that another output was that, you know, this group of citizens had a much more in-depth, robust understanding of the complexity of decision-making and the complexity of the kind of task that City Council had as it related to energy transition, particularly the role of a municipal government within this. And it also helped the city to, I think, understand as they kind of witness the kind of questions and information needs of citizens, like how they could further their other engagement in education and initiatives specific to energy and climate. So those were kind of some of the outputs. Another output, or I guess would slide a little bit more into impacts, was the implications for city staff that participated in. I think it was to undertake a citizen panel like this, which required, you know, a huge amount of risk and a lot of resources. I think throughout the panel process saw very clearly the value and the importance and the, I guess we're exposed to an example of public engagement that they hadn't otherwise been exposed to, where they saw that citizens were capable, when given the right amount of time and resources and supports, to offer up very insightful suggestions and input to inform kind of ambitious policy making. So impacts of the panel process. So as you might remember at the beginning, I said that the citizen panel wrapped up in 2012. And if you can see on this slide that it wasn't until 2015 that Edmonton City Council voted unanimously to pass the Energy Transition Plan, which incorporated the panel's final recommendations. So quite significant success and impact on, as you see, one of the P's here, on policy. So it actually had a significant impact, including that citizen panelists themselves were involved in multiple presentations to City Council. One, at the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, the citizen panelists, some of them, presented their panel report to City Council for information. And then they contributed again in the decision point stage, presenting again around the panel's recommendations and then tying them to some of the decisions that were made in the energy transition plan. So one of the challenges and in this particular project that we hadn't fully anticipated, I think, at the design stage, was that there would be such a long period of time between the panel process and final decision making. So we ended up finding ways to keep panelists involved until decision point happened, so that they could continue to see that their input had an impact on decision making, and that they could see the process of decision making that came out of their panel recommendations. So so the city involved panelists following the citizen panel process in, helping them develop some of their implementation strategy. And so there was probably 3 touch points from when the panel ended to when decision was made with panelists. So we tried to keep sustaining their involvement, and we would send regular email updates so that they were aware of where everything had landed. But that was one of the challenges as well that were not anticipated at the get-go. We also, as I mentioned, did very extensive research, and we had a number of academics involved from the Alberta Climate Dialogue, which was a University of Alberta research group. And we were able to have evidence that looked at how people's knowledge, skills, attitudes, and sense of efficacy shifted and changed throughout the process. And there has been additional follow-up research with panelists, 3 months, 6 months, etc., following the panel. So we can kind of have a sense of the impacts more longer term when citizens are involved in these very robust kinds of very meaningful processes. And also we saw quite significant impact on engagement practices. So this was the 3rd citizen panel that the city undertook. They have done an additional one since this that I was involved in. So, and we'll watch a short video that you'll hear now Mayor Iveson, and he was mayor at the time that this was passed, talk about, and some other councillors from the City of Edmonton talk about how they now see the citizen panel as a really important mechanism that is part of their city's engagement practices now for, as I mentioned at the beginning, high impact, contentious kinds of topics. Given the time and resources that are involved, again, you wouldn't want to do this for everything, but I think quite a huge success from an engagement perspective that councillors and senior administrators now see this as an important tool in the way they do public engagement. And just want to touch on, which I think I've shifted there already, just around the impacts to city administration and council. Again, it provided them with really important input and a sense to gauge where Edmontonians at on this, given that we had Edmonton in a room, both attitudinally and demographically. So really having a sense of the ability to design an energy transition implementation plan that was really reflective and responsive to the values, priorities, and perspectives of Edmontonians, and allowed them to see where there is certain potential ideas that were being considered that would not be supported by citizens for a range of reasons. It also provided, really good information for council members who eventually had to vote on this implementation plan and really determine overall direction for city, and that they had a really good sense of how the energy transition plan aligned with citizens' values and opinions and priorities. And finally, the process was extensively documented and researched. So there's been a number of, we did a number of surveys at the beginning, middle, and end, and then after the panel ended, there was observational research that was done. There's been a number of journal publications by a number of different academics who were involved that looked at everything, again, about the experience of the panel, shifts in their knowledge and views over time, and again, whether or not these kinds of processes lead to longer term changes to how people view both public involvement and how view both energy and climate, and how panel shapes and impacts decision making or not. So I do want to share a video with everyone, but before I talk about, or before I share the video, I just want to, again, because I can't see if there's questions, so I'm just wanting to touch base to see if.
Sure. So again,
up just after the video, just kind of some lessons learned that that came out of this, I think, from both myself, one of the project leads, but a number from city staff as well.
So Fiona, did you want the video played now?
Well, I was just, are there any questions, or maybe we'll just wait for discussion?
Okay. Well, I'll share that video now. Just bear with me here. Okay.
And just to let folks know that we made 2 videos, one during the panel process to really capture the diversity of opinions and views that were present in the panel. So you can really see that attitudinal diversity, the kind of experience and impact the panel process had on citizens. And then we also did an additional video in 2015 that demonstrated the impacts to policymakers and citizens themselves.
I think the citizen panel gave confidence to council that a representative group of citizens armed with the right information would come to the same conclusion that our administration is recommending, which is that we should take action, that there's an upside in the action, and that upside is not all about greenhouse gases, which are important as an issue unto themselves, but that there's other benefits here around cost saving for citizens and businesses, as well as improvements in air quality that everybody can get behind, regardless of their position on anthropogenic carbon.
I think they've really got some strong messages and some really tangible messages they can use, and tangible advice. So I think that'll be a really important stage, and then I'm hopeful that it'll also go through to City Council and go through along with the administration's report, and that it'll be taken seriously at that level as well.
Looking back, it was quite the journey. It started with a phone call, a random phone call, and sort of culminated today, over 2 years later, in the vote to endorse a significant plan for energy transition for the City of Edmonton. So, as I say, it's some pride and a sense of accomplishment.
I believe without the citizens panel, it would never have gotten passed, because there's a lot of issues, and I think with the fact that it went through a citizens panel and the citizens agreed with it, and how high the number was, that the councillors kind of were put into a corner where they couldn't say no.
Well, I think the panel's influence was quite profound in the end, because I think it did give everybody comfort that we were not out of line with what a group of citizens of this city coming together and deliberating we're going to come to in terms of, you know, their understanding, their decision, and their beliefs about how we should move forward as a city. Because I mean, ultimately, we don't get there unless everybody's on board. I think it was reassuring to know that what we suspected was there in terms of public support was actually there, and to be able to test that, and to be able to know that if people really have a chance to look at this and weigh the options and understand that there's trade-offs, that these are the answers that they came up with.
The actual recommendations of the Citizens Panel report did come into play in developing the strategy. There were some great pieces of advice that we packaged as strategic actions, sort of the foundational logic of the entire strategy. But not everybody is passionate about climate change, but they're still supportive of energy transition.
The city obviously hears a lot from industry and from business and from developers directly, so it was nice for us to have our voice heard and to be part of that equation in terms of making this very significant decision.
I think there's two things that I would have done differently. One is had a much more rigorous and creative communications or strategy with the larger public, or involve the larger public somehow in connection with the citizen panel, either through social media, through other forums in which they could observe, weigh in, be connected to the citizen panel. So connecting the larger community. I think if we asked the broad public, are they aware of a citizens panel, what that is, they may not have a good response to that. So I think trying to bring more people into the panel. And the other one, I think, is if we had known that coming to a decision would take 2.5 years, I think I would have thought very differently about how we approached keeping people involved.
The panel was strong in the way that it took
took a representative group of citizens and let them have their own deliberation, but I'm curious about what might have been gained if we'd woven that together much more rigorously with civil society organizations, with the business communities, and given the citizens a sense of who was doing what out in the community, and also given those different sectors a sense of connection to and ownership of the panel. So I think it was a powerful process, it was an influential process, but it was also somewhat isolated from other conversations and other places of conversation.
As a first-hand observer, I can see that the process had real meaning, and then subsequently to remain in contact with some of the panelists who've taken it upon themselves to advocate and to be leaders in the community on this issue. That's been one of the most inspiring dividends. That, and I think giving our city administration the confidence to know that citizens, given the opportunity to debate and given the opportunity to be informed about this issue, would come to a strong consensus that our council reached today.
Because I think what is so powerful about the Citizens Panel is it allows people to hear from each other, it allows people to get really well informed and then respond. But getting that happening over a longer period of time, making sure that information now gets out to the larger group of citizens who were not able to sit in the room and hear that discussion and hear from each other and get the information. I think that's the limitation of the Citizens Panel. I think how you now take that, I think it's a good stand-in for what would happen if we got any group of citizens together. I think it tells us what would happen if you could put an entire city through that process and let them hear from each other. They would all come out in the same place. I'm absolutely confident of that. But the real challenge now is, and its limitation, is how to make sure that the whole city can go through that process, and that's a much harder task. I would like to see more processes where citizens are involved in a deliberation, make recommendations, and are kept formally and explicitly involved in policy development and implementation. I think it is a waste of the citizens' capacity and a break between citizen voice and policy development when the panels are disbanded and administration and council carry the work forward. So I'd like to see some innovation around how citizens can be convened over much longer periods of time to do their work alongside administration and council.
I think the resilience of the panelists to remain involved, remain champions of the strategy that they support as citizens, I think that's the thing that's been inspiring and surprising the most. So I think it's a valuable process.
Feeling like citizens have your back as a policymaker, and then vice versa, I think is pretty important.
Okay, yeah. I
Awesome.
think we're ready for some questions, right, Fiona?
Yes, and I just want to, and I think the video did a good job of just, we've had lots and lots of lessons learned and kind of critical reflection, but do you want to just kind of, one final comment before I just, we go back to this kind of big question, and any other discussion people want to have is just, again, how, I mean, innovative is not maybe the best word, but I think just in the Canadian landscape there, I mean, this was quite a unique in the work of the City of Edmonton in trying to do these kinds of projects. There are very few examples still on a national level of these kinds of ambitious citizen engagement projects. There's some work of colleagues that I know in Ontario that have done some citizen reference panels, so with some similarities, but hope to see this work happen in more and more places.
So if there's any questions through the online Q&A window, if you'd like to post some questions for Fiona to consider and respond to. Well, Fiona, I was really impressed with the respectfulness and the thoughtfulness, and maybe most importantly, the actual link to a deliverable where it ended up at City Council. That kind of blew me away. That was excellent.
Yeah, and I think that's really critical. And I think we did a lot of project development time at the beginning to really have kind of difficult conversations with city administration around, it is a risky process. And it's a resource intensive process to kind of really build buy-in and do a lot of sort of upfront educational work around what a citizen panel is. But it's absolutely critical to have a connection and a serious connection to decision making. Otherwise, the implications of that for citizens are really huge in terms of destroying public trust and also people's sense of efficacy.
Yeah. So again, folks, if you'd like to pose some questions for Fiona to respond to, you can do that through the online Q&A window.
And our comments, like I would love devil's advocates, anyone who thinks it didn't make sense.
So how can citizen panel participation be carried forward? How does this support or conflict with elected representatives?
Yeah, and I think one thing that we made, I think, very clear from the outset around in this process was that city council was the ultimate and final decision maker, and that was really clear. But I think we were also, we also ensured still that the citizen panelists themselves had a robust role and place within helping to inform that decision. So yeah, citizens themselves weren't final decision makers. There are examples in the US of citizen kind of deliberative processes where the outcomes are more binding, for lack of a better word. But I think it was really clear, and I think citizens were comfortable. And I mean, in the first video we created, there was citizens who also were quite articulate about, you know what, I don't want to be the decision maker. I want to be very much involved in the process, though, and have decision makers have a really, really in-depth and robust understanding of citizens' views, values, priorities, etc. And how we sustain engagement. I mean, I think there's been some great examples from the city, and I mean, one of the ways was trying to involve citizens in the sort of governance structure around energy transition implementation. Another example that the city is working on, the City of Edmonton, right now, is around having a bit more of an advisory committee council role around supporting just ongoing citizen input onto how the city's doing public engagement. That's part of their council initiative on public engagement. So there are some examples, I think, of ways that citizens are their sustained participation in engagement.
Okay, so was there growth in understanding regarding anthropogenic causes of climate change? I mean, was this a goal or an accidental outcome?
No, that was definitely a goal, yet being very cautious in that we were not, I mean, in the panel, a panel process is designed to help people build their understanding and knowledge, but that they need to come to their own conclusions. So I think it's really careful. You have to be very careful in that you're not, providing one opinion and try to convince people of that. But definitely, and we have research evidence about how people's knowledge and opinions on that shifted. There were also examples, and Don Iveson alluded to this in the video as well, where people's opinion on climate change didn't shift, but their support in the city actually taking action on energy transition was huge shift in that. So some interesting things that I don't think we anticipated. I mean, there was one gentleman, he's in the other video as well, where he's quite like, I'm not sure I still believe in climate change, but I very much support sort of low carbon future or the city moving forward to address this. So all sorts of interesting shifts in opinion and attitude and knowledge, definitely. Mm-hmm. Huge shifts in knowledge. And I think people an understanding too of how it impacts like on a municipal level as well. But there was also lots of conversations, which is in the energy transition paper, around the roles of and leveraging other orders of government.
Well, I'm sure the folks that were involved, Fiona, were thrilled to see the kind of results that you guys ultimately delivered and that are featured with the discussions within the video. So folks, any more final questions for Fiona to consider? No, Fiona, this has been wonderful. I mean, it was an excellent presentation. And I mean, like I said, the more important thing is that you guys demonstrated this link between going out and actively engaging in citizens, and then for them to see results in such, you know, a clear way that you demonstrated within the video. So I just love that that direct output and response for citizens to be able to see.
Yeah, and I think this has provided, as I said, an important case study for, you know, municipalities, governments, you know, engagement folks across the country about the as I say on my last slide, some of the possibilities of this kind of really participatory or more deliberative forms of public engagement that for certain topics and certain public and certain policy challenges are really critical and really important. Yeah.
Well, again, Fiona, thanks so much for doing this, and for folks that weren't able to kind of tune in. This, of course, will be posted to our YouTube channel, which people can find within YouTube by searching for MCCAC, our partner, the Municipal Climate Change Action Center. Again, Fiona, thanks so much for doing this. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. And I just wanted to give a final kind of shout out to all of the folks that were involved in the design and the development of this, including many folks you saw in the video, like Dr. David Gahane, who's a scholar academic at the University of Alberta, but also all of the city staff that were involved. Jim, you saw him on the video, like hundreds and hundreds of hours were put into this. So I want to acknowledge their participation and the work that they, and the city as a whole for doing this.
Absolutely. Again, Fiona, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, Ted, for hosting, and awesome.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Bye now.